Well, hello, folks. I think we're live. The thing says live and recording. I didn't hear any tones, so I'm guessing I'm talking to someone right now. Good evening, folks. My name is Eric, and this is Skeptic Haven. This is a call-in show where anybody who wants to call in and chat, theists, atheists, non-believers, doubters, those who are deconstructing, those who want to just talk about little esoteric things about religion or the Bible, can call in and discuss stuff with our host. We have a good show lined up for you tonight. We're going to have a fellow from Dragons of Genesis named Jason, and hopefully some good conversations. So, producer, let's roll. And
this is Skeptic Haven. Let's talk.
okay, I think we're here.
I'm here.
Okay, cool. We're here. Like, I got two streams up. One's the actual like call-in studio thing that we're on, and then I got the other one's the actual broadcast. The actual broadcast showed the intro music. We didn't see it here, so we didn't have a cue. Whatever, technical difficulties. Hello, folks. Again, my name is Eric. This is Skeptic Haven, call a live call-in show. And tonight we have my co-host name is Jason from the podcast Dragons. I'm sorry, from the Dragons and Genesis podcast. Hello, Jason. How are you doing?
I'm great. How about yourself?
Yeah, doing really well. Little discombobulated because just the day was busy today, and this is kind of like a new setup. I'm not quite used to this new thing they got going here. But yeah, no, the day's going great, and hopefully we're gonna have some calls coming in here pretty soon. Folks in the audience, if you're watching, you can see right at the bottom here we have call in live 984-400-5656, or there's a URL in the description right here. What you can do is you can call in, you can get in the queue, tell the screener what you want to talk about, and we can put you in the queue and get you up here to talk about things. But in the meantime, Jason, I virtually know nothing about you other than your podcast name and your first name. So I would love to know more about kind of what the focus of your channel is, what focus of your podcast is, and what got you into it, and what do you like to talk about?
So as you mentioned, it's the Dragons and Genesis podcast. And essentially what the show is, it's a secular Bible study. And my goal, not my initial goal, but what became my goal, is to create the most comprehensive audio format secular Bible commentary available anywhere in the world. That seems pretty ambitious, and it certainly is. But that's not what I set out to do. Originally, I was just talking about sort of comparative mythology as it pertains to the book of Genesis. And that was it. It was going to be about a dozen episodes focused on one book, and I was going to be done with it. And by the time I finished Genesis, I had people asking if I was going to continue on and do Exodus. So I decided to go ahead and do the whole Torah. And by the time I got done with that, people were asking about Joshua, Judges, Kings, and the entirety of the Old Testament. And here I am, 100 episodes deep in this thing. I now am sort of committed to doing a Bible commentary for the entirety of the Bible. And not just like the Bible that you have, but also like the Catholic version with all the extra books that they have that, the Protestant Bibles don't. And also the books that like the Ethiopian Bible has, like First Enoch and things like that.
Yeah.
And then I have a list of about 100 other books relating to Jewish and Christian mythology that also have to go in there. Like the Shepherd of Hermas and the Didache and things like that. So, yeah, I'm going to be busy pretty much for the rest of my life working on this.
Yeah, it sounds like you kind of like you made a little snowball and you put it on the top of the mountain and you started rolling it, and now it's just kind of bigger and bigger. And now it's kind of just out of your control, and like, okay, I guess we're going with this.
Yeah. That was not my intent at all, but I'm kind of stuck with it. And along the way, I collected the most amazing listeners. Like the people who follow my show are absolutely like just the best.
That's great.
And several years ago, one of them was like, "Why don't you make an Amazon wish list of research material?"
Mhm.
And I was like, "Okay, whatever." And so I started populating the thing with a bunch of books that I wanted, ranging in price from like $5 to 250. And then the book started showing up at my house. And like there was a GoFundMe to
Mhm.
get a $250 piece of research material
Mhm.
and get it autographed by the author and sent to me. So I probably have about $3,000 worth of books that I did not pay for.
Wow.
And this is all being used to create this thing that without my listeners, I would not be able to create.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so,
That's
yeah,
awesome.
I'm,
I I had
bit,
a little chuckle there
you
because
know,
if, I had a little chuckle there because if you were a religious or a Christian, content creator, and all of a sudden you got this like embarrassment of riches in books, I'm sure people would be saying, "Oh wow, God is blessing your efforts and your ministry and blah 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 blah
yeah,
blah." But it's funny how like that can happen for people. I won't say I have no idea like what your like like what your attitudes towards like religion itself are, but like me myself, I'm a little anti-religious, I'm a little anti-theist, but not like full blown. I think religion's a bad thing ultimately in the world, and I would like to see it go away, just through education, through naturally just filtering it out of our society because we have better things to do. But it's funny how that type of good things, those types of like blessings, can happen to both sides. Like you started a
right.
podcast and now you got like $3,000 worth of material that you can just basically like build your content off of, and it just kind of
Yeah,
just came to you without even asking. It's yeah, it's pretty cool.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
what would you say is your favorite topic so far that you have kind of like deep dived in the podcast? Like something that like raised your eyebrow or something that you made you say like, "Whoa, I never knew that." Like, yeah, like what
Yeah,
you think?
it would have to be the Book of Enoch. Several years ago, I put up a poll on my Facebook page asking people, should I cover the Book of Enoch or Scientology? Because I was kind of getting burnt out certain
Yeah.
section of the Old Testament, and my brain just doesn't do well whenever it gets bored or
Hmm.
feels like things are getting tedious. So I was
Yeah.
gonna, for a few episodes, step away from the Hebrew Bible and do something else and then come back to it.
Hmm.
And at first Scientology looked like it was going to win, and then it became a landslide vote for the first Book of Enoch.
Book of Enoch. Yeah.
And so I started researching it and found that the majority of the material out there that is readily available to the general public is either just really poorly researched,
Hmm.
or it's full of conspiracy theories. Like
Yeah.
giants are real, Bigfoot is a demon, and the Anunnaki are coming from the planet Nibiru to take over Earth or something. Angels are aliens. It was stuff like that. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, so I had my work cut out for me, like just trying to find good research material, and listeners came through again. Um, and about $500 or $600 worth of books later, I was able to actually take this deep dive, which turned out to be, I believe, 7 episodes, averaging about 45 to 50 minutes each. Um, and it became the most comprehensive coverage of Enoch available for free anywhere in the world that does not include ancient aliens. So if you want to learn what the first book of Enoch actually says and what it's about based on good scholarship, um, I think it's like episodes 38 to 40 something or something like that.
Yeah. I'm
That
a
that's gonna be it. That my
yeah.
podcast has it.
Yeah, and your podcast is the entire collection of your podcast available on YouTube? Because that's where I'm kind of browsing right now. You have like
Yeah, the
122
vast
videos on
majority
YouTube.
of the
Yeah,
episodes, have been ported over to YouTube.
cool.
The most recent I haven't done yet, but those are gonna be coming out, over the next couple of months. And what I started doing recently was once I got to the book of Daniel and I finished up the Hebrew Bible, I went back and redid all of the Genesis episodes. I wasn't happy with them. I thought they could be much, much better. And so
Yeah.
the first 14 episodes, they've been deleted from YouTube, and new episodes to replace them are dropping. And so episodes 1 to 14, those are being refreshed. Better audio quality with my, much better gear,
Yeah.
and better research material.
Very
Uh,
cool.
and the
Very
episodes
cool.
are longer too, so you get more for free.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, because I'm while you're speaking, I was like browsing your backlog here on your channel. Yeah,
Yeah,
122 videos. So it looks like you've
yeah.
been posting videos for up to 4 years. Looks like.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
The
it's great.
podcast has been going on for about 10 years, and I started putting stuff on YouTube about 4 years ago. On YouTube, I tried to make separate playlists for each topic. So if you want to find Enoch, there's an Enoch playlist. Go there, and it has all the Enoch episodes in order. Hit play all and have fun.
Cool.
Um, so
Well,
yeah.
very cool. Yeah, no, that's awesome. So, tell me, we're still waiting for callers, by the way. So, folks in the audience, if you wish to call in, and you can anyone you want or anyone you want to be, call in and talk to us. Tonight's episode, the title is to talk about the Bible and like kind of what's in it. But we can talk about just about anything, whether you just want to talk about just general theism or deconstructing or whatever. We welcome all callers. But yeah, and Jason, so what's a little bit about your background? Like, were you born into a religion, or did you have like a religious upbringing? What kind of got you interested in the topic of this kind of literary study and such?
Yeah, so I was raised Catholic, the one true faith, and
Of course.
yeah, yeah. And I was devout. I was in
Yeah.
training to become a catechism teacher. Um, there's this book called The New Catholic Catechism, and it's
Hmm.
about basically Catholic doctrine. Like every topic you can imagine, there's a section on it, and it's like, this is what you believe if you were a Catholic.
Yeah.
And I had read the thing like from front to back, because there's all this theology in there that doesn't come from the Bible. It comes from like early church fathers like Justin Martyr and people like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So I'd read this thing, and I was going to become a catechism teacher, not professionally. That's like a couple hours a week sort of thing, but
Hmm.
it was something that really interested me. And somewhere along the way, I started reading the Bible, just sitting down and reading the entire thing, which Catholics don't tend to do that.
Yeah.
But I decided I was going to do it. This was my faith. I needed to understand it more. And so I picked up this Bible. It's a good study Bible. So I start reading the thing. And like right off the bat, I start having questions, because I'm seeing like the earth is being created twice, and God
Hmm.
is being called different things from one chapter to another. And then when you get to Noah's Ark, it's giving you all these details, but then it comes back and it gives you contradictory details.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I look at the footnotes, and it's talking about how there are these two different sources, and these sources were, compiled to make one story. And it even told which verses came from the Yahweh source and the priestly source. So I get a highlighter, and I highlight all the verses from one source, and I go through and I read the two completely separate flood stories that are
Hmm.
contained in the book of Genesis. And I realize these are two completely different stories. These are two stories, and they mashed them together. How did
Yeah.
I not know this?
Yep.
And so then I had questions, and when I asked these questions, I wasn't getting good answers. And I had a friend who was actually in seminary. He was going to become a priest, and he recommended some books for me to read. This was, you know, this is like seminary study material. These were some of their textbooks and things like that. So I get on eBay and I order some of these books, which are, scholarly material is not cheap.
Yeah.
Not even, in like 2001 or
Yeah.
2003 or whatever. But I got my hands on these things, and I start reading them. And I realized that some of these details that I found problematic, that I had asked my priest about, that there were good answers for them, but they weren't the answers I was given.
Hmm.
And I realized that if I wanted to learn more, if I wanted to understand this book that my life was sort of built around, I couldn't go and ask a person because I wasn't gonna get honest answers, and that really aggravated me.
Yeah.
Because I was being lied to, and I did not appreciate that. So I started buying more books, and I started reading, and I'm reading these commentaries and all this study material and things like that while I'm reading the Bible. And for anyone out there who has never done this as a believer, that will eradicate your faith. Like that is, and there have been numerous polls. The number one reason atheists say that they have left their faith is studying their religious material,
Yeah.
studying their holy books. And that's what did it to me. But by the time I got through with the Old Testament, I was an atheist. And then I had this like hole, like there was like this religion in there, this faith, but it was gone now. And
Mhm.
I needed to fill it with something because now I had this curiosity. No longer did I have all the answers. Now I just had all these questions and I needed to find out. I needed to understand. And I figured, okay, I'm going to go buy a few more books and I'm going to understand the Bible. Yeah, that was 20 years ago. I have more books than ever and more questions than ever.
Yeah.
And I have a to be read pile that is about the size of the books I've already read on the topic and more coming in every month. So yeah, it's just become sort of an obsession.
Yeah,
I've
it sounds
just,
like it sounds
you know,
like you found the thing that can go in there and fill that hole that,
yeah,
your religion, your false religion left you. I say
yeah.
that kind of tongue in cheek because I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, the only true religion, obviously.
Oh, I thought
And
mine was.
yeah, it's funny. Like we were both told the same thing, but they both
Yeah.
can't be true. I wonder how we resolve such a conundrum.
Yeah,
Um,
you flip a coin.
I guess so.
That's
Yeah,
the best way,
you
I
you
think,
have faith. You
you
just
know?
feel it strongly. Like I'm watching a Maverick being frank in the chat talking about how faith is too strong to be eradicated. Well, I mean, uh, Maverick, my faith stronger than yours. I would say. How I demonstrate that, I don't know, but I just feel it. I have faith that I had faith. Um, so it's like we, yeah, like being told separate things, but coming from two competing religions, being told two separate things, but being given the same mechanism by which to confirm those things, mainly being faith, really demonstrates that how terrible a tool faith is to come to any
Yeah,
type of truth understanding. You can do simple thought experiments where you're going to have, uh, the Christian and a Muslim or a Jehovah's Witness and a Catholic, and sit there and you can say, okay, well, how do you know what you believe is actually true? And faith is just a it's just a it's like the Bible says itself, faith is belief in the things unseen, which when I look at that and I say, oh, the things unseen back then, what was your main source of evidence? I'm sorry, belief is faith is the evidence of things unseen, but back then your main way of gathering evidence was through your eyes. They didn't have like uh, the robust methodologies we have today to do
right,
analysis and testing. So basically, you almost interpret that as faith is the evidence of things unevidenced. Like it's a
yeah,
contradiction to me in terms, and it's like just how poor of a tool it is in order to come to any type of truth about the world. And if all you say is, "Oh, faith is just my strong feelings about it," then that's great. But feelings can obviously be wrong. We need to
right,
have something better than that. And yeah, analyzing the scriptures, reading it, is something that has really helped a lot of individuals to get unstuck out of their religious beliefs.
yeah,
I I kind of think of a religion because most religious claims are unfalsifiable. Uh, Very very poor evidence for them. Very very bad methodologies in determining whether it's true or not. But then on top of that, there's like virtually no falsification for most religious claims. So folks in belief, they get into this belief loop. It's just like
yeah,
confirmation loop. And there's no way out of it because you have no way to falsify any of it. And
right,
so yeah, just like sometimes it takes like some like type of like life event or some type of like shock like you went through, or like, whoa, wait a minute. How did I not know these things about these stories? These are stories that I put my faith in. And then all of a sudden I realized that my understanding of the stories is actually either inaccurate or incomplete.
right,
And having the bravery and the wherewithal and the fortitude, the intellectual fortitude to stand up and say, hey, you know what? I want to resolve this. I want to inspect this and look at this and see what I can learn. And it's amazing where that takes you because, it took
Yeah.
you right out of your faith. And I'm sure you didn't expect that at all.
Oh, no.
I know.
No,
Yeah.
oh, please go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was gonna mention. I was gonna talk about Matt Dillon. He got himself out by studying the Bible more.
Yeah.
Numerous other hosts over on the line, other friends of mine, also got themselves out by simply studying the Bible more. Apologia is one of them. Apologia, I think his journey started
Oh,
once he
yeah.
read the bottom of the barrel uh, apologetics from like Ken Ham and Answers in Genesis about how the kangaroos got back to Australia after the flood. Apparently, they hopped along
Oh,
floating
yeah.
logs in the ocean. Like
Yeah.
when you look at that, and you go, yeah, you know what? I think we've got some bad info here. We need to kind of re-examine.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I will say one thing about creationists and biblical literalists. I would actually rather have a conversation with them than with most other flavors of Christianity
Hmm.
because they are at least honest about what the Bible says.
Yeah.
And you can pin them down on and say, okay, this passage, this verse, let's talk about this. While most other Christians, they have like this extremely vague idea about what the message is. And Jesus is this kumbaya figure who's, doing all these great and wonderful things and, you
Hmm.
know, all these other things. And when you try to pin them down on something and you show them, okay, this verse says the opposite, they're like, "Well, I don't really follow that verse," and they just go off to something else, and it's like, "Okay, so
Yeah.
you
A lot of.
you claim that your beliefs are biblical, and yet you believe in the opposite of what this thing says. So
Mhm.
where are your beliefs actually coming from? Can we talk about that?"
Yeah.
"Oh, no, it comes from the Bible." Well, clearly it doesn't. So yeah, some of my best conversations that I've ever had with religious people have been with young Earth creationists. Like, I'd much rather talk to someone who follows Ken Ham than some of the newer flavors of apologists coming out, like the
Yeah.
presuppositionalist and stuff like that. Like, there are people in the chat, like, I'm not saying here, but, like, people I have seen in the chat of, various live streams, whenever I see them, I just close the chat and I do not look at anything from them, because
Mhm.
it's like banging your head against a wall.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
don't get
There's.
that from the creationist.
Yeah, like yeah. There's a certain fun to talking to the biblical literalists, the individuals who are young Earth creationists, because at least they're sticking to their guns and they aren't watering down their message. Um, but yeah, and that can have some like really interesting conversations there. Uh, but yeah, I think as I've had numerous conversations over the past couple years, I've only been doing this for maybe about 2 years now, like in a public forum like this. Um, Yeah, I've noticed there is a pattern where when you start talking to an individual about something and you start kind of getting at something good, like, hey, we're starting to identify a contradiction or a problem with your position, they'll want to like pivot or perform some like whataboutism and go over here now, and kind of ignore the problems that are developing over there and go to something else that they're more comfortable with. And it can be a little frustrating when you're observing that behavior, or even like certain behaviors like projection or reflection. Like
Mhm.
for instance in the chat, because we don't have any callers yet, folks. If you're in the chat, call in. Maverick, call in if you think faith is a good method or valuable in any way. But I'm going to pick on you some more there, Maverick. Like Maverick, instead of talking about why faith is valuable, he simply says, well, you're doing faith too in science. And it's like, well, no, not really, if you think about it. But what if we were? That still doesn't make faith a good method for coming to truth. So, like, instead of like talking about why faith is valuable, you're just simply saying, well, you're just in the same boat as me. And that doesn't get us anywhere. So, Maverick, call in. Tell us why faith is a good tool if you think that's the case. And if not, give us a reason why. We would love to hear that. Or anybody else in the audience might be listening who wants to discuss that. You can see in the very bottom of the screen there the phone number and the link. Um, but yeah, Jason, like, yeah, it's it is fun. Like you kind of start identifying the different types of believers that you can interact with, and like
Yeah.
which ones are going to be the fun ones, which ones aren't. And I agree. Like presuppositionalists are not very fun because they aren't really interested in the conversation. Generally, there might be a few of
No.
them out there, but I've yet to like see one in the wild. Um,
Everyone that I have seen follows the exact same pattern in their
yeah, they
argumentation,
they
and at
have
some point,
literal they have literal flow chart. I'm sorry, they have literal flow charts that
yeah,
they pull
yeah.
up and they go through. It's not a conversation. It's more like a questionnaire.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a few times I actually upset a few of them because when they went in on their thing, I started posting what their next statement was gonna be, and,
Hmm.
like, I would drop it in, and then their statement would pop up right after mine, and I'm like, "Hey, look, this, I can accurately predict the future,
Yeah.
based on my scientism faith, but you can't, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, I've had a few get really upset with me because of that, and I'm like, dude,
Hmm.
um, yeah,
Yeah. I
yeah,
think I think just to pick on the presuppers a little bit more. I think presuppositionalism is very impressive if you're already a believer. If you're not already a believer, then all you're presenting to a new person is, well, you have to believe without reason, or else nothing else makes sense. And oh,
yeah,
by the way, I can also take that presupposition and logically justify it, which, in my opinion, that's no longer a presupposition that is then logically justified is no longer a presupposition. It's a truth claim
yeah,
supported by existing presuppositions. So they're kind of like treating it both ways, and it just feels really just gross all the way
yeah.
around. Um, but yeah, and it's going back to the way you deconverted, the way you read the Bible and the way you kind of identified problems in there. I was kind of the opposite. I got out because I was a Jehovah's Witness. So like obviously you were raised as a Catholic. My wife was raised also a Catholic. Um, and I know like Catholics, they don't like condemn other Catholics for going to higher education, going to university. In fact, they encourage, things like
Yeah,
seminary, things like, biblical colleges or theological colleges to learn more, to go into like the priesthood or, all that. And I'm not sure about the details, but I know Catholics at least encourage that type of higher education, that type of like development.
right.
Jehovah's Witnesses are the complete opposite. Jehovah's Witnesses are
Mhm.
like all higher education, bad. Higher education is Satan's tool to get you away from God's true organization. Obviously, God's true organization. Um, it's a distraction. It will make you doubt the faith and get you out and everything like that. So when I started waking up when I was 26, 27, this is in 2009. Um, I I had virtually no tools to work with when I was,
Mhm.
waking up. It was mostly just feelings and intuition and emotion, which is a terrible,
Yeah,
terrible tool set, but it was all I had, unfortunately. And I didn't realize at the time that it was a terrible tool set. I was just working off my intuition. And so anyway, I ended up backing away from the religion. I kind of got out of it. I managed to navigate the waters to avoid getting like disfellowshipped, which is like kind of like excommunication in the Catholic Church with slight differences. And then discovered the online skeptic community. I started listening to shows like the Atheist Experience. We know like back in 2009, and then at that point, I started learning a little bit more about like what skepticism was and what atheism was and all that. And after a few months, I realized I started calling myself an agnostic, and after a few more months, I started calling myself an atheist because I realized that while I could not justify any particular position I was in, I was not a believer. I just simply did not believe in a God anymore. Um, and so I realized that, hey, I'm just an agnostic atheist. I don't have a belief that a God exists, but I don't claim to know that no gods exist. So I kind of settled in there. And then over the years, just kind of more and more, just kind of personal study here and there. Nothing like serious, like obviously you've gone through. You have a very like you had like a passion for this, and you got a focus on it in your personal development. Learned a little bit more about it over the years, and then maybe about 4 years ago, I started diving a little bit deeper into things like logic, philosophy. I started, thanks to Paula G and listening to his channel, I got really interested in gospel history, how the gospels were written, and the problems we have with the gospels, things like the synoptic problem, things like copyist fatigue between the gospels, how we can see how certain copyists were copying parts of Mark into Matthew or into Luke, and they would change details because from the looks of it, from the pattern, we see Matthew and Luke were kind of like a refinement of Mark. It was kind of like if Mark was like 1.0 of the Gospels, Matthew and Luke were like version 1.1 and 1.2. And you could see how the copying, there was actually problems that crept in. Like a title was changed for an individual, and then later on in the book, the title suddenly reverts back to the original title that was found in Mark. And you can find numerous examples of this kind of stuff in there. So that was like really fascinating. Learning things like, well, we actually don't know the gospel writers. They're all considered anonymously written books. Tradition says they were written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but the evidence doesn't say that.
Right.
And the fact that they were written in Greek, far away from the land of the events that they supposedly depict.
And decades later.
Decades later, way later. Mark is, generously, Mark is like 60s, which is 30 years after 40 years, almost 35 years after the crucifixion. 60, 70, sorry. It's about 25 to 35 years after the crucifixion. John's like 110. And it's like, these guys, considering the life expectancy back then of, probably 30s and 40s for these people, highly, highly, highly unlikely that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John lived that long to pen those books in a different country, in sophisticated Greek, and copying from each other while they were doing it for the most part. So that kind of stuff, that's what really opened my eyes, and then that's when I got into kind of more into studying that, because I was like, wow, this is interesting. This is stuff that I did not know as a witness. I didn't know any of these things. Mark wrote Mark. I mean, it's obvious. His name's on the book. I was like, well, think about it. And so that's kind of what really fascinates me today. I'm doing I'm in the middle of it, but I'm doing a comparative reading of all of the Gospels, all side by side. So you make 4 columns on a paper, and as you read each passage, you have to jump around to match them up. You read each passage, and you can actually write in there the differences you find in between the passages, who found Jesus's grave empty? Was it the women, or was it multiple women? Was it one woman? Was it men? Was it the angels? It's really, really fascinating stuff. Just the discrepancies that you can find in the book, that you're never shown that by your religious leaders.
Right.
You never, because those are really inconvenient facts that they just either don't know because they were actually not taught it, so they were ignorant of it, or they purposely ignore it because they know that these are like stumbling stones in the faith, and their priority is not to give you the truth, is to keep you in the faith.
What I always found fascinating about that is, you look at just the opening chapters of Matthew and Luke, and you realize that these are 2 separate stories. So Matthew's talking about how Jesus is born during the time of Herod. Okay, so 4 BCE or prior. And they live in Bethlehem. This is where Joseph lives. Mary gives birth in Joseph's house in Bethlehem, and then they have to leave because Herod pulls this whole, Pharaoh slaughter of the innocents thing, which is literally where he got it. It's just this one little scene from Exodus being retooled. And so they run off, they hang out in Egypt, and then the angel's like, hey, you know what? You can go back. It's all safe. Herod's dead. And when they almost get back, oh, hang on. His son's on the throne. Yeah, he's just as bad. Go to Nazareth and hide out there. And so, what, you didn't know that? Come on.
There was
just look at it. And then Luke does the opposite. Luke has him living in Nazareth, not Bethlehem. And they travel to Bethlehem for the census of Quirinius a decade later. And there's no mention of Egypt, and so did they start in Bethlehem and go to Nazareth, or did they start in Nazareth and go to Bethlehem? Was it 4 BC or 6 AD? What was the, it's completely different things. And they're trying to solve, they're doing this because they're trying to solve a problem. Because Mark is talking about how, Jesus is this Nazarene, but he needs to be linked with Bethlehem because that's the ancestral home of David, and they want to do
think I might have lost you, Jason.
Oh,
No, you broke up there for a moment. You were saying Bethlehem is an ancestral home of David, and then you cut
right.
out. So go ahead,
Yeah,
continue.
and
Yeah.
so they're trying to link him with both Bethlehem and with Nazareth.
Mhm.
The problem is, with the exception of one passage that is actually a later interpolation that probably didn't exist at the time that Matthew and Luke wrote their gospels, Mark doesn't say that Jesus is from Nazareth. He says he's from Capernaum. He calls him a Nazorian, which it's a Jewish sect. Matthew and Luke didn't realize what they were reading. They thought that he meant he was from this town that
Mhm.
wasn't inhabited yet at the time that Mark wrote his gospel, but had been re-inhabited by the time Matthew and Luke wrote theirs.
Yeah.
So they're trying to link him with a town that Mark never linked him with. So they were trying to solve a problem that did not exist.
Yeah.
So yeah, and the gospels are full of things like that.
Yeah.
And they
It
rearrange the timelines. Like Matthew completely changes the Markan timeline. He cuts the gospel apart and shuffles the thing around and stitches it together
mhm.
in a whole. It's a genius way that he does it. It makes this really cool like mirror pattern when you look at the plot. But yeah, they felt free to do this. Because you were never supposed to read all of them. You were
Yeah.
supposed to read the one, or you're supposed to have read to you whichever gospel was in your region.
Mhm.
Mark had his for his region. Matthew retold it for his audience. Luke did the same thing for his audience. And
Yeah.
then Michael Bay wrote the Gospel of John for his people. So yeah, it's
It, it yeah, and it all the things you say, you can, as you read the gospels, like when you read the gospels critically and objectively, yeah, you can see those patterns in there. And the whole thing to me smacks of just humans writing a story, trying to fit the oral tradition, the oral stories at whatever sources they had, because it could be that the writers of the gospels perhaps toured the area and listened to the stories of believers and collected all these disparate stories and tales about this Messiah figure, and then they compiled it together into a story while using references of like the supposed prophecies that were supposed to support the coming of the Messiah. Or these individuals, they had like advisors up in Greece, and they were working off of what they were telling them, and they had these Greek translations of these Jewish texts. And the things we see in the gospels, the patterns that we see, like you mentioned, the fact that I think it's Matthew very explicitly says, and then this happened in order to fulfill this prophecy. Then this happened in order to fulfill this prophecy. The whole thing smacks of just the motivation to get a story out there that fit what they thought was prophecy, which they got some of that done wrong too. References to prophecies that at least no longer exist, or references to prophecies that were actually prophecies, but they thought they were. Justin over at Deconstruction Zone, he's actually his YouTube channel, he does a lot of live and calls, and he does an excellent job of talking about how his claim, it's an interesting claim too, that Jesus fulfilled none of the messianic properties, not a single one in the Old Testament. And he'll actually go into them and actually explain why he says that. But the whole enterprise there really just smacks of just humans trying to shoehorn this Jesus character into this perception of who Jesus was supposed to be, using inaccurate sources, using oral tradition tales, and like I said, just all these separate stories floating around that different Christian groups were kind of circulating. And yeah, the whole thing, like I said, just completely just smells of just this a human effort to put together to make sense of all this information that was floating around back then. And I don't think it was done with like the intention of like creating the world's biggest religion or to mislead people or anything like that. I think they were just people putting together stories, and because they thought they were
yeah.
interesting or they thought they had value, or maybe somebody commissioned them to do that. And I think just like when it comes down to like things like we biological evolution, the natural selection, the good stuff that keeps you alive and thriving stays, and the stuff that is detrimental for your survival goes. And this is like a natural process. And I think that's the same thing that happened with the stories, the 30, 40 years of stories that were circulating before Mark was written. I think just the stories that were appealing to people, the stories that made converts, obviously propagated and spread because they were good stories, they were convincing, and they made converts. And those converts went on to spread those stories. And then the stories that didn't do the job, they died. They went away because they weren't doing their job. And I think after
Yeah.
like 30, 40 years of this happening, then the writer of Mark comes together and says, okay, we're going to put all this together and make a book. And then that's kind of where, like I said, version 1.0 and then 1.1, 1.2, John can he kind of be thought of like version 2.0, where Jesus is like full on part of God and is God and all that stuff. Like, I mean, John 1:1 is like the thesis of the entire book about the word being God. And yeah, you can kind of see this really natural, like human development in the story over, 90 years between Jesus' supposed death and, the writing and the completion and circulation of John. It's really, really fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
Wes dropped in a chat. We weren't able to read it, so I managed to pause it though. Wes says, I can't call in. Can Jason tell us when Enoch lived around Moses? Can Jason tell us when Enoch lived like around Moses? After or before? Yeah.
No, this would have been way before. So according to the story, Enoch was one of the patriarchs before the flood. So this is after Adam, before Noah. He's like I think like the great grandfather of Noah or something like that. He lives like 365 years. What's interesting though is he's the first person in the Bible to not die. There's a few people who don't die. Like Elijah. Elijah flies up into heaven on a flaming chariot, which is typical for sun gods. They do that quite often. And Elijah used to be a sun god till he got demythologized. But Enoch was the first one to do it in the Bible, like Genesis chapter, I don't remember, 5 or something like that. It's going through all the different begats, Seth begat this person and that person and that person, all the way to Lamech. And, then you get Noah, and then God decides to reboot the earth again. But when you get to Enoch, he goes around and he's really close to God. And then it says that he did not die. Like he lived on earth 365 years, but he did not die because he walked with God. Or because God took him. He flies up into heaven. And then, you got Methuselah who comes around, and you got Lamech, and then you have Noah. And then there were these different stories floating around Hebrew mythology concerning the flood, especially from like Genesis 6, where it talks about the reason for the flood. These sons of El Elyon, the great high God, who's the father of Yahweh. Some of his sons came down. They flew down to earth, and they had sex with human women and created a race of giants called the Nephilim. And that corrupted the world. And that's where sin came from. That's the origin of evil, according to Genesis 6. And then, God is like, I got to fix this somehow. Let me just baptize everything, and the whole purpose of it was like, okay, look, in the very beginning, he separates the waters, and he, the primordial ocean that was in the very beginning in Genesis 1, it was like raised up, by the firmament, and it was separated from the earth. And okay, the heavens and the earth, you have two things. They're completely separate now, we're establishing order here. Okay, enough with the chaos. Now these angels have come down. They've brought the divine down into the realm of mortals. This transgression of the natural order angered Yahweh or El Elyon. And so he says, okay, well, if you want to bring heaven down to earth and corrupt what I made, I'm going to bring the rest of it down. And so this whole primordial ocean drops back down on them. And it basically returns the world to the pre-creation state, where it's formless and void, and it's covered in this dark, this primordial ocean. And then he has to start creation all over again. And so in Hebrew mythology, they had all these stories about this that weren't in the Bible. And so sometime probably around the 3rd or 4th century BC, they were like, hey, let's write some of these things down. And so they started doing that, and they started to flesh them out and add to them. And this went on up until about the 2nd century BC, around the time the book of Daniel was written. And they took all these stories that hadn't made it into the book of Genesis, um, and stories that they had just come up with, and they made this book called First Enoch, and it's in 5 sections, just like the Torah, and it has all these stories that you're not going to find in the Bible, like all these different things of like battles with angels and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Different, like another version of the Noah story that you don't
Yeah.
have, that the
The
angels come down, they
the
build the
fun
boat.
the fun mythology. Yeah.
Yeah, this is where their mythology went, okay? The
Mhm.
Bible, a large part of it was getting rid of their mythology. Um, a lot of writing back then was in like poetic verse. Think of like the Enuma Elish, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the
Mhm.
works of Homer. All these great pieces of mythology. They're written like these epic poems. Well, the authors of the Bible, they didn't want to do that. They wanted to do the opposite. They're like, no, we're going to write this more like a history. And so they took their mythology and they washed it. They took gods and they turned them into people.
Mm.
The sun god Shamash became Samson, and all of his great deeds got demythologized. And so no longer is he, doing these great, sun god miracles. Now he's just like knocking over pillars and setting fire to your crops.
Yeah.
But that's the bones of it, okay?
Yeah.
It's still there if you know how to look for it. And so that's what they did. But some of those ancient stories survived. Not the really old ones, not the things from like before the Babylonian exile, but some
Mhm.
of the later ones are still around. Um, and that's where we get the Book of Enoch. It's this cool collection of Jewish mythology, from a sect of Judaism that wasn't part of the temple. They were at odds with the temple,
Yeah.
much the way the Christians were. The people who preserved Enoch and the earliest Christians, they're the same people. Um, so yeah, it's sectarian Jews who had, um, a less demythologized version of their identity than the Jewish temple did.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And yeah, like just same way we see today how with like how just with Christianity alone, we have 35,000 plus denominations, and how they're continue to branch and splinter, and to we see branches die and other branches kind of go off and flourish and become bigger, and then they also break off. All of that is nothing new. Like, that's been happening for forever when it comes to religious beliefs. And a lot of what went into the current versions of these myths has been like, lost to history. But it's amazing that we have some stuff, like you mentioned, the Book of Enoch and a few others that are still preserved, and we can actually get a glimpse into kind of what was going on back there and the disagreements between ancient Jews and like you mentioned, those that were writing the Book of Enoch, and those were who the temples of the, or I'm sorry, Jews of the temple, like the way that they were disagreeing with things, and how we had like these two branches of the same kind of faith. Makes you
Yeah,
wonder how many other ones are out there, how many other little like groups and opinions were forming.
yeah,
And most of that's been kind of lost to time, just because we don't have the way to, back then they
yeah.
didn't have ways to record things reliably. Makes you wonder, like, if humanity's still around in like 1,000 years, 2,000 years, most of probably, if a lot of this is still going to be recorded in digital form in some way or another. It's kind of a thing in science, is how do you store data in a reliable way that can last a really long time? Because most of our
Yeah.
current like commercial data storage products are limited in how much time they can reliably hold data. But there are ways, like with I read it a while ago, but they have ways of storing data like reliably for like millions of years if they
Yeah.
use certain materials and such. And it makes you wonder, like, 2,000 years, what are people back in the future going to look back to us and go, wow, only 35,000 denominations of Christianity. That's quaint. It's like,
Yeah, yeah. It was funny because, like, earlier we're talking about, how we had like 4 different gospels for, 4 different communities. It was actually worse than that. 'Cause there are 4 that we have canonically, but we know of about 30 more. So there were dozens of other gospels out there, and we still have some of them, either in whole or in fragments, and others we only have like references to them.
Mhm.
But like there were dozens of different denominations of Christianity, even in the very beginning. Like when Christianity, like in its earliest form, it was already fragmented. And like you just go back and read like the letters of Paul, and he's talking about conflicts with the Jerusalem Christians, Cephas and James,
Yeah.
and so he's
They did
butting
not
heads
like
with
each other.
them. What's funny is they seem to only be arguing about things of the topics of food and foreskin,
Yeah. The
and
important
you
stuff.
know yeah. But most of the other stuff, which when you really get into like Pauline beliefs, it's pretty out there. Like he had some weird beliefs,
Mhm.
but they don't argue about any of that. They're only arguing about whether or not you need to be a practicing Jew before you become a Christian.
Yeah.
Um, but those were just two different groups, and
Yeah.
they were viciously attacking each other over, how you prepare your meat and whether or not you have to, excise a part of your penis.
Yeah.
But we read about, other forms of Christianity in the first few centuries, and there were some truly bizarre sects out there.
Mhm.
Um, like there's some I probably can't even describe the things that they would do as part of their communion ritual on the live stream. You'll get demonetized for that. But like there were some truly bizarre things,
Yeah.
and it was, you know, and it
You,
was like
you,
all these things were considered valid in their own communities. It wasn't
Mhm.
like there was an Orthodox Christianity and then a bunch of corruptions of it. It was all these different Christianities, and some groups became more popular and others didn't.
Yeah.
And none of them actually survived. Like there is no true Christianity. Uh, like by the 5th century, they had all made so many modifications to themselves, so many adaptations.
Mhm.
Uh, you know, so many compromises to get along with others that by the time of Constantine, Christianity was almost unrecognizable from, its inception.
Yeah.
And Christianity today, none of the denominations resemble what we had even 500 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
So
yeah.
yeah, it's crazy.
The crazy. I mean, even what remains is pretty bizarre if you stand back. Like, imagine if you're just an alien, you land on Earth, and you've never experienced humans at all before. What you're eating crackers and wine, and it changes into the literal flesh and blood of this guy that's been dead for 2,000 years in your mouth, and he told you to do this.
Yeah,
And like, yeah, it's like it's a religion of blood magic. It's
yeah,
blood redeems for sins. The blood of a perfect man can redeem for the sins of all humans.
yeah, yeah,
Jehovah's Witnesses take it even further, which blood is like blood is life, and blood is sacred, and blood cannot be consumed at all. And it's like and they take it even further to like, ban blood transfusions, even if it's gonna, save your 6-year-old daughter who was in a car accident or something. Like
yeah.
they take it to the extreme.
Oh, it's
um
horrific.
yeah,
You
it's
know?
really, really bad. But yeah, Christianity really boils down to just like the at the base of it, the core part of the redemption, the redemption function of Christianity. It really comes down to just blood magic.
Yeah,
Um, and yeah, and so like if that's what survived, then yeah, what craziness was in the past and got filtered out because it was maybe a little bit too extreme for most people. Because probably what we have today is probably the most common denominator, lowest common denominator, like
yeah,
features of the religion that most people could accept. Um, and You mentioned earlier how even our Christian denominations today are vastly different from what was 500 years ago, let alone what was originally Christian. Yeah, atomic punk. Their symbol's a literal torture device. Um, with the cross. I always had the thought experiment, like in another dimension, where Jesus, if Jesus died choking on a pretzel, would Christians wear pretzels on their necklaces, and would they split denominations over whether the pretzel was salted or unsalted? And just like again, that pedantry, that being pedantic
Oh
about the
yeah.
details and caring about these types of things, how you just simple disagreements can become so fervent and so put so much enmity between individuals in a group that it can splinter, and now you have two completely new factions. And we see that,
Yeah.
we saw that with the Protestants and the Catholics, and we've seen that even within Jehovah's Witnesses. Jehovah's Witnesses splintered off 3 or 4 groups on their own, and they're all kind of at odds with each other. But anyway, I went off on another tangent again. But yeah, one of the things that Jehovah's Witnesses leadership boasts about is that since obviously Jehovah's Witnesses are the one true Christian religion on the earth, they most closely resemble what was original Christianity that was laid down by Jesus and the original apostles. That's their claim. And that they basically think that Christianity was corrupted by Satan immediately after it started. But witnesses, thanks to divine revelation or whatever process they went to back, like the early 1900s, they got the witnesses back. They got themselves back to the original Christianity by just simply reading the Bible. And if you look at that objectively too, like the Bible doesn't really lay out too much about what Christianity should be. Like things like, I think like the Nicene Creeds not really comes from the Bible. It's a lot of like church tradition developed over a long time, kind of became Christianity. And at that point, nobody has any claim to what true Christianity is. What is true Christianity? Why can't nobody agree on it? Why, if it's such an important thing, why didn't God write down a Christianity handbook? And people say it's the Bible, but it's like, the Bible talks about Jesus and talks about the Acts of the Apostles. And then you have all of Paul's letters, half of which are contested to be whether genuine or not, things like that. Like if this was such an important thing, if this was such an important document, and true worship is so important, why is it not better instructed in a more reliable way? Why was it put into this book that has numerous problems, which we talked about earlier? Why was it put in this book with numerous problems? Why was it not preserved accurately? Why is it even a book at all? Like, couldn't God have come up with something better to 100% no problem effectively communicate this message to everybody in a way where there's not 35,000 Christian denominations today? Like it doesn't line up, unfortunately, but it is fascinating to talk about, which is, I think, is like why you're into it and I am into it.
Yeah. They talk about how, just go back to the Bible. Okay. Well, which version, because we've got hundreds of different versions of the Bible, and your version of the Bible, what's it based on? Which manuscript traditions? Because it's probably not based on the oldest ones out there, because when people look at the oldest copies available, they really don't like them. They want their Bible to be about 1,000 years younger. To be honest, a lot of your Bibles out there are based off manuscripts that are only about 1,000 years old. And your King James, most of its manuscripts were written after the death of Christopher Columbus. Okay. And a lot of Protestants love their King James.
Yeah, they swear by him.
I think it's actually the second or third version of the King James that they like. The first version they scrap.
And I think they used was it the first version or the second version? They used like Latin manuscripts to translate off of. So like you've already gotten you talk to most like serious Christian scholars, or I'm sorry, Christian theology scholars, or just simply Bible scholars. And like King James is like it's useless when it comes to any type of like literary analysis, historical analysis. King James is a good snapshot into what the perception was at the time of its writing, but it's not a good representation of what was originally written in those manuscripts. 1,000 plus years before.
Yeah,
because it's
the purpose of it was to bring the Bible in line with the Anglican Church.
Yeah.
People don't realize this, but scripture is based off of theology just as much as your theology is based off of your scripture. Grab two different copies of the Gideon Bible from a few decades apart and put them side by side and start flipping through, and you probably won't get through page 1 without finding changes that have been made. And this is one version from one ministry from the same publishing company. They're constantly making changes. Now, I saw a minute ago we had a question. I think it was about the stories of Jesus and some of the Greek epics, like the works of Homer. I didn't get to see all
Let's
of
see
it.
here.
Okay, yeah, here we
Yeah.
go. How much of Christianity has Greek influence, particularly Platonic views, and also Homer, like mythology and such, making its way in. Or is that wrong? Also, other influences you might have. Yes, actually, some of the more recent scholarship, especially from Dennis R. MacDonald, has shown that there's a lot more Greek influence on the gospel stories, especially in the Gospel of Mark, than previously thought. There are entire scenes taken like right out of the works of Homer, like the Iliad and the Odyssey, that have just been dropped straight into the Gospel of Mark.
Yeah.
Um, and this is like really cool stuff, like the whole thing with the Gerasene demoniac. He crosses the sea, which the Sea of Galilee does not exist. Mark describes this giant, massive sea. It takes 10 hours to cross. It's beset by these massive storms and all that. At the time of its writing, there was no such thing as the Sea of Galilee.
Hmm.
Centuries later, after the time of Constantine, Christians got tired of people ragging on them about there being no such sea in the middle of this desert. So they took Lake Gennesaret and they renamed it Sea of Galilee so that Mark wouldn't be an embarrassment to him. Okay, and it doesn't take 10 hours to cross in sailboat. It's
Yeah.
like 90 minutes in a canoe. Okay.
Yeah.
These scenes are taken out of the Odyssey. And so he crosses the sea, he gets this new land. And in some ancient manuscripts, it's not the Gerasenes, it's some other Greek word, and it resembles the word for giants. So he goes to the land of the giants, and when he gets there, there's this dude, and he lives in this hole, and chains can't bind him, and all of this other stuff. And he comes in, he drives out the thing. Um, oh, the guy recognizes, you know, he recognizes Jesus. He calls him out by name, and there's this whole interaction. Jesus commands the demons. He drives the demons out. He puts them in a bunch of pigs. The pigs run off in the
Mhm.
water and they drown. And then when he leaves, the dude is like, "Hey, can I come with you?" And he's like, "No, you can't." Uh, this is Odysseus and Polyphemus, the Cyclops, who lives in this cave, and that he breaks out of his chains. He recognizes him on sight. He wants to go and like chase him down and stuff. All these things, it's like the same events in order. And
Mhm.
when he pulls the demons out, and it's this legion, this Roman word for a big
Mhm.
collection of soldiers.
Yeah.
This is a reference to a separate scene in there when Odysseus encounters Circe, and his sailors, who are all soldiers. They get turned into pigs, like the demons get put into the pigs, and then they go into the Mediterranean Sea and they all drown. He's taken two different scenes from the life of Odysseus, and he kind of puts them together to make this scene in his little,
Well,
adventure novel about Jesus.
Jason, what you gotta understand is that God knew what was gonna happen, so he took elements of those stories and he sprinkled them in to false mythological history in order to prepare the reader for the story of Jesus casting the legion out of the pigs and into the sea. Like, this was all part of God's plan. No, like, I've heard
Yeah,
that
yeah,
excuse before. I've heard
yeah.
that excuse
I've also
before
heard
where
that the
yeah.
devil did it to confuse people.
Yes, that one too. Kinda like
So
devil
yeah,
putting bones, dinosaur bones in the soil to mislead us.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
the
Which that's
same.
actually a T-shirt. There's a
Yeah,
company called
yeah.
Teach the Controversy, and
Mhm.
they have the devil, and he's wearing like overalls, and he's
Yeah,
shoveling bones into the dirt. It's
yeah, I love
great.
it. Teach the controversy.
Um,
And
Yeah,
but
there's a
it
whole bunch of them like that. The foot washing scene,
mhm,
Jesus comes back, and like the woman is like washing his feet, and she recognizes him.
mhm,
Oh my Lord, I didn't realize this was you and all that, and she's like, oh, go and don't tell anybody, that you
yeah,
recognize me. And then she goes off to this certain land or whatever. Well, the land she goes to in the gospel, um, a specific name is given, and like, why would that matter? It's the name of the woman who recognizes Odysseus his old nursemaid, whenever he finally shows up at the castle and he's disguised as an old man,
Mhm.
and she recognized and oh, no, don't tell anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the Odyssey. Actually, the vast majority of the Gospel of Mark can be traced to older literature.
Yeah.
The works of Homer, the writings, like Jesus keeps quoting from Paul's letters a lot,
Mhm.
which that's really weird.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
Considering Paul is after that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But when you realize that Mark didn't write his gospel until about a
Yeah.
decade after Paul died,
Yeah. Now it makes
yeah,
sense. Like that's a reason why it
yeah,
makes sense. Yeah. But
yeah.
to a Christian, a Christian said will look at that and go, "Oh, Jesus was planting that seed so that you knew Paul was a true
Yeah, yeah,
apostle." Like just a rational, like I mentioned earlier, these are
yeah,
rationalizations, eliminating falsification, and now you're just in this cycle of confirmation. Literally, no
yeah,
matter
yeah,
any piece of evidence can come your way, and you can explain it away. It's all
yeah,
part of the plan. Yeah, shows how as a religion, as a belief that this is true, how worthless it is.
yeah,
But as a piece of literary analysis, it's like that's pretty funny. Like
yeah,
it's
yeah,
neat to see how one ancient text affected another, and how what they did, and how they basically, I don't call it plagiarizing because I don't think they really had the concept back then, but they took something, cut it up,
yeah,
rearranged it, and it's like a remix. It's like a Daft
yeah.
Punk
They're
remix.
they're they're
Like put it out
retooling it.
there. Yeah.
Yeah. And Mark was actually his writing style's like very quaint, but the guy was a literary genius.
Yeah.
Okay. And you can see this like just in the opening lines of Mark, uh, which actually the title is actually in the first line. It's the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. That's the original title. It wasn't,
Mhm.
renamed the Gospel of Mark until much later. But
Yeah.
um, right after that, he's like, as it is written in Isaiah the prophet, and he has this sentence in there. Well, if you go into Isaiah, you can't find that sentence. You can find something
Yeah.
close in like chapter 40, verse 3 or something like that. But half the sentence, you don't like, where is this?
Yeah.
Well, it's Malachi 3:1. He actually takes two different sentences from two completely different texts and he merges them together in a really clever way. And it sounds really cool. And he
Mhm.
does this a lot. Okay. And so he was really good at taking all these disparate sources and putting them together. Jesus coming in and stilling the storm. It also has its parallels in the works of Homer in the
Mhm.
Odyssey, but it also has parts from Genesis chapter 1, from the story of Jonah, and from one of the Psalms. So he's taking four different sources: the Odyssey, Genesis 1, the story of Jonah, and one of the Psalms, and he's merging them together beautifully
Mhm.
to create this iconic scene that everyone remembers. It's one of the most recognizable stories from the life of Jesus. Of course, it didn't come from the life of Jesus. It,
Mhm.
came from
Yeah.
earlier
It's
literature.
a
But
clever
the
invention.
entirety of Mark is like that. Actually, for the upcoming episodes, there'll probably be 3 or 4 episodes. I go through every story, every scene in the Gospel of Mark, and I show where it came from. Uh, and it may be disappointing to learn that it doesn't look like any of it has anything to do with any first century Jewish carpenters.
Yeah.
It has a lot to do with Paul, a lot to do with the Old Testament. There's some Greek literature in there. There's some Enoch in there. He's got, quite a few scenes from the first book of Enoch in there. Um, but there's nothing that we can actually trace back to like a Jewish rabbi or a radical or a revolutionary or anything like that, because the scenes that do seem like they preserve some sort of historical account, some parts of his biography, um, all the biographical details, they're actually in there to serve some logical purpose, and they look like they came from older literature.
Yeah.
And in fact, a lot of them actually contain phrases that were lifted verbatim out of these sources.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's really it's beautiful literature. It is,
Yeah.
the author was a genius.
There was a
He
lot of
was
brains behind it. Yeah, like, there's a lot
yeah,
of brains behind, many of the scripture or,
yeah.
books of the Bible, including the
I,
Gospels.
I'm
Yeah.
convinced that the author of Mark spent more paper outlining his gospel than he used writing it. It's
Probably, yeah.
incredibly complex, um, but it's not really historical.
Yeah.
This is literature. It's a beautiful literature. It serves a theological purpose, and it was. I don't think it was even meant to be historical. The whole thing reads like allegory, and I think it was understood to be allegorical. And in
Mhm.
chapter 4, he kind of breaks the fourth wall and tells you this is allegory, and you should understand it as such because there's a meaning behind it.
Mhm.
And once you get that, then you'll understand the meaning.
Yeah.
And that's why like his disciples are kind of idiots through most of it. They,
They kind of
you know,
are.
he goes, all right, look,
There's
give me some ingredients, and I'm gonna make 5,000 McFish sandwiches to hand out. And then like in the next chapter, man, how are we gonna feed 4,000 people? I only have a few loaves and fish. And it's like, dude,
like,
do you not remember what he just did yesterday?
weren't you just there for the previous story? Yeah. Yeah.
And Jesus is like, have you learned nothing? The disciples
Yeah.
weren't that dense. You are the disciple. You're reading this, but you're not yet grasping it. And then near the end, when he's about to be arrested, he does some little thing. He's up on the mountain. And they say something, and he's like, now you're coming close to understanding.
Mhm.
You, the reader, the audience, you're starting to understand the message of the gospel. It's not literal. It's not historical.
Yeah.
It's allegory. It's meant to teach you a lesson. Um, that was the purpose of it. Even I think like Origin actually addressed some of these criticisms. I think it was Origin, and told people, if you read this literally, you are missing the point. Early
Yeah.
Christians didn't see this and say, this is what happened. No, they're saying, like, this is what we can take from it. This is what we can learn from this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Gives you a little bit of insight of how the books were perceived back then as compared to the common perception now. Many
right.
Christians view this as literal, like written history, like these things literally happened. Jesus literally said these words and did these things. When evidence indicates that these stories were compiled together from previous other extra biblical mythological stories,
Yeah.
recompiled, re-edited, and then used as teaching tools. Like, this is not
Yeah.
literal history. And it's like we said a few times, like, this is really fascinating what these writers did and the work that went into doing this. Christians, though, don't like this because now, if the books are no longer literally retelling what Jesus did and said, now
Right.
you don't have what Jesus literally did and said. Anything you think he did and said is really coming from your own tradition, your own religion, your belief, or just your own mind. If we
Yeah.
literally have nothing that Jesus actually did or said, then we don't have a religion there that is like valid in any way.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and it's a really uncomfortable, and that's why I like being a skeptic. That's why I like being where I am now, because it sounds kind of snobby, but I like using the term. I heard this a couple months ago at a different podcast. Um, Being a skeptic, not being chained to religious belief or dogma, grants us intellectual agility in the way that we view and analyze these books. We are not limited to what we can think. We're not limited to the conclusions that we can reach. We can look at this and go, okay, what are all the possibilities? And what does the evidence bear out? And when you look at things like how the books were compiled from previous sources, things like I mentioned earlier, the synoptic problem and the fact that we don't know the authors and the fact that they were in a different language and they were copied from each other. And you brought in like much more in depth about how the stories themselves were actually compiled. Evidence indicates that this is a work of man as some type of teaching tool or as some type of storytelling mechanism for people back then. This was never meant to be turned into a religion. This was never meant to be literal. And if that's all true, and that's what the evidence is showing, then that means that highly unlikely Jesus did any of this, that he actually walked the earth, that he actually was the son of God, and then at that point, now you just went for the jugular Christianity and it's over. Very, very uncomfortable for believers to look at. But as a skeptic, we can look at this and go, wow, this is so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, really good stuff.
Yeah. And what's funny is that by taking the Gospels literally, the Christians of today are making the exact same mistake that the pagans of the past were making. The
Mhm.
Christians told them, do not take this literally. You're meant to understand this spiritually, allegorically. You're meant to understand the message. And so, yeah, I think it's kind of funny that Christians are making the same mistake that pagans made in the past
Yeah.
by mistakenly believing that this was history and meant to be understood as such.
Yeah. It's motivated humans who want certain things to be true. I think really what it comes down to. And
Yeah,
we're all, and we're not saying that as like, like, oh, look at these normies and their beliefs. Like we're all susceptible to this. We're all susceptible to motivated thinking and lack of objectivity. But recognizing that, hey, like, and here's the thing too, like we're like, if anybody watches this and goes, oh, well, they just don't have faith, they don't know what they're talking about my favorite book, the Bible. Think about how you, viewer, would think about, looking at the stories of the Quran or looking at the stories of the Vedas,
yeah,
or Book of Gilgamesh, the Epic of Gilgamesh, or anything like that. Like, what what analysis, what tools would you bring to look at those books and analyze them that you would not with your own book? Why is there a double standard there? Why is there a need for
right,
one
right.
book to be true? Like, this book has to be true because I don't know, I want to see grandma again in heaven, or I want to see people I don't like suffer in hell. I don't know whatever the motivation is, but what is keeping you from applying the standards that you apply to any other mythological book to yours? Like,
Yeah,
what's the difference there? And because that's kind of one of the things that I did when I started waking up. And like I said, when I woke up, I realized I didn't have a good reason to believe any of this. But then as I went back and I started looking at the Bible through a more objective lens, through a more uh, uh, unbiased position, yeah, you could start seeing all the problems. All the problems are just there. All of a sudden, you see them. It's like your blinders were taken off of your eyes, and you're like, "Whoa! Actually, I see things now
yeah,
that were I for some reason my brain would just gloss over before." And that's just the literary stuff. We're not even talking about like the moral atrocities of the Bible and stuff like that. We haven't even touched any of that tonight about, like the slavery and the genocide and the infanticide
right.
and God wiping out the innocent to punish or to compensate for the sin of a leader and such. And it's like, yeah, the Bible is a fascinating book, and it gets super scary when you have people that take it and say, oh, this is truth, and this is what I'm going to base my beliefs and moral systems around. That's really
Yeah,
horrifying. But as a piece of literature, and as something that we can analyze and look at the history of, it's like super fascinating. And
yeah, yeah,
individuals have spent their entire lives doing this. Like, Bart Ehrman, he's a biblical expert, or a gospel expert, basically.
yeah, yeah,
Reads Greek and one of the most foremost minds on just the gospels for the most part.
yeah,
And that's his life work, just that one part of the Bible. And look at how much
yeah,
Bible there is. Like, yeah. And yeah, it's fascinating stuff. It's really, really great.
yeah.
Um,
I really like his work, Lost Christianities,
mhm,
and it just talks about like all these different versions of Christianity that lost. They
mhm.
they got wiped out.
Yep.
Like the first Bibles that were created are gone.
Mhm,
People talk about, oh, let's go back to the Bible. Yeah, the original Bibles we don't have, and I don't mean like the copy of yours isn't that old. No, I mean the original Bibles no longer exist. They got destroyed, and other Bibles were created as sort of a rebuttal to those. And then like this went on for a while, and what we have now isn't a modern representation of our old Bibles.
mhm.
It's a modern representation of like the fifth or sixth iteration
Yeah.
of what a Bible would be. And it's only one version of that. Like look at what the Marcionite Bible was. It's completely different from what we have today. And like it was based around a sort of core from the Gospel of Luke that like likely didn't have the first three and a half chapters. It's
Mhm,
like the first three and a half chapters of Luke was added on later. It like the real beginning is like halfway through chapter 4. That's when Luke actually starts.
hmm.
And like the last one or two chapters of Luke also got added on. And tidbits here and there in between got added in. But the Marcionite Bible, it was like that, the letter to the Hebrews, some of the
You cut out again. Give you
Um,
a second. There we go. You're chopping up one more time. Rewind about 15 seconds and then resume.
okay,
Happen
yeah.
again.
So the earliest Bible, the Marcionite Bible,
Mhm.
Marcion of Sinope, it was the core of Luke, which is not the Luke we have now, but omit the first 3.5 chapters and then the very end of Luke and some of the stuff in between, and
Mhm.
that's your old Gospel of Luke. The Epistle to the Hebrews, some of the letters of Paul, including some letters we no longer have, and a few other things. And that was the original Bible. That was the first Bible we had. And later Christians, they rounded all those up and they burned them because they didn't want them. Um, and then the later Bibles that came out, those were also destroyed. And it's Bibles from much, much later, from like the end of the 4th to the beginning of the 5th century. That is essentially the kernel of your modern Bible. But even then, all of those Bibles have books we don't have, like the Shepherd of Hermas and things like that. And you look at the 4 oldest Bibles from the end of the 4th to the mid 5th century. We've got like 4 of these things, and none of them match. Like they all
Mhm.
have books that the others do not have.
Yeah.
And even if you put like their gospels together, there are hundreds, if not thousands. I think the 2 oldest Bibles, if you put their gospels together, you have something like 1,500 discrepancies just from the gospels, just from our 2 oldest complete copies of the Bible.
Yeah.
Um,
That's bonkers.
yeah,
It's
and
like
if you take
completely
yeah,
expected because it's just these are just works of humans and copying
yeah,
problems and all this other completely expected.
yeah,
Bonkers if you
and
think of
deliberate
God.
changes too.
Yeah, and bonkers if you
So
think of God's behind this, and this is his most
yeah,
important message he could ever convey to mankind, and we have these issues. Yeah, it
the
doesn't.
author of confusion.
Yeah, yeah. In in my I'm a software developer. We have something called the smell test, and it's like, yeah, it smells like a fish. It's probably a fish.
Yeah,
So it's yeah, it's interesting stuff because like you look at all these issues and you're like, yeah, this is like not quite lining up with what the Christians are saying is actually happening here. Completely lines up with just a secular interpretation of it. Is just like, yeah, this is just literature changing over time and exchanging hands and being reinterpreted and recopied and yeah, all that kind of stuff. And it's fascinating, really, really good
yeah.
stuff. So we're coming up to 90 minutes here. We haven't got any callers in the queue at all, unfortunately, but that's okay. We had a really good conversation, I think.
Yeah, I saw we had a
So
question from Wes a minute ago.
another one? Okay. Let's
Yeah,
take a look
yeah,
here.
he keeps bothering us tonight.
I know. It's like, what's this West
So
guy's
what's with that
thing?
guy? He must be
Yeah.
lonely.
Oh, here it is. Okay. I have it right here. So I'll just read it. Hey, there it is. Okay. Jason and Eric, is there much you've learned from the Bible? Question mark. Interested in your answers and not sure how I'd answer. Surely I learned something even as an atheist from it. Well, I guess it depends what you mean by learned. Um, I have not learned any moral lessons from the Bible, at least none that I haven't shed after I left Christianity.
Yeah, I
Um,
hope not.
yeah, yeah. I mean, as a piece of just literature from humans, the Bible does have some amazing, like, just really profound verses that are like, wow, that just like strikes the heart. Like I believe it's in Proverbs when it talks about expectation postponed. I think the scripture says expectation postponed makes the heart sick, but the thing desired when it comes is a fountain of life or something like that, or a tree of life or something like that.
Yeah,
You read that and you're like, wow, that really describes what I have felt in the past, how you long for something, you really desire something. Like it can be anything. Like you're a 6-year-old kid and you're going to Disneyland on the weekend, but man, Disneyland is 3 days away, so long. And then finally you get it, and it's like, oh, it's like a cool drink of water. And you can even as an adult, you have. I've noticed as I get older, I'm 43 now. As I get older, things kind of excite me less and less. But every once in a while, there'll be something that comes along that's like, yes, I am excited for this. Oh man, 4 months. I got to wait for this movie for 4 months, or I got to wait for this video game, whatever. But when it comes, you're like, wow, it just hits you. And it's like, yeah. And like when you read that proverb, that author understood that. That author understood what almost all of us go through when we are expecting something that's highly anticipated, but we have to wait for it. So yeah, stuff like that. I like little tidbits like that in the Bible that just kind of like really describe the human condition, really describe kind of day-to-day emotions, because these were just people too. Doesn't mean it was inspired by God, because anybody could have written something that profound, because humans write things and humans feel feelings, and we all are humans. So yeah, I think that's one of them. I think my other one is I like the philosophy that let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we may die. That's another really good one. Really kind of gives you the like presses on you that, hey, life is brief, can be cut short in an instant. Don't even see it coming. So you really should not hedonism. I'm not advocating for hedonism here, but enjoy the things in life. Take your time. Like your dog wants to go for a walk, take your dog on a walk. It might be the last time. You never know. So stuff like that. I like little tidbits like that, and going, okay, what can I use to enhance my life with this? So the Bible has some good stuff in it. I will absolutely say.
Actually, that one, eat and drink, for tomorrow you may die, that actually came from the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Yep. I think I remember that when I studied Gilgamesh. I looked at that in Gilgamesh and I said, that looks familiar.
There's a lot of Gilgamesh in the Bible.
I think a lot of the flood too. Like flood was kind of lifted from Gilgamesh as well, right? Because I know you said the flood was like cobbled together, but the flood in Gilgamesh is very, very similar to
it's the story of Utnapishtim from the Epic of Gilgamesh. That's where that came from. There's a few elements. I think this is like episode 6 of my show. There's a few elements that do come from other sources, but it's the Epic of Gilgamesh, which they had. Like there's a thing called the Megiddo fragment. It's a chunk of Gilgamesh in cuneiform discovered at Megiddo. This is like not far from Jerusalem. They were reading this like 1,000 years before they wrote Genesis. Okay.
Wow.
They had the book, they were reading it. It was the most like widely distributed piece of literature in, at the time. Like anywhere in the world. It was all over the place. It had been translated to like 14 different languages and stuff. It was everywhere. They loved it.
Wonder how many people back then thought that was like accurate history. Like,
it
makes you wonder,
One of the things I did was I traced it back further, like before the Epic of Gilgamesh, and just like roll back the centuries, further and further. Atrahasis, like Utnapishtim, Atrahasis, Ziusudra, go all the way back to an actual flood event in the city of Shuruppak on the Euphrates River, about 4,500 years ago. This thing that was, rain up in, present day Iraq. It came down onto the southern floodplains. The city got inundated. A lot of people died. There was actually about 3 of them over the course of a couple centuries. So we don't know exactly which one, or maybe all 3 of them inspired the story. But right after that, the story of Atrahasis pops up, and it says that this took place in the city of Shuruppak. And as the story spread and grew from this devastated city, more and more details get added on. And so it goes from like the Sumerian kings list all the way up to the Epic of Gilgamesh. And so this is a thing that happened. It was a regional flood of a handful of cities in southern Iraq on the Euphrates, and a lot of people died. And it inspired this story. And it just grew in the telling. And one of the things in there was like the water rose like 17 cubits, which is like 22 feet. And then the Bible just adds to the end of that sentence, over the highest mountain. So it's like, okay, you went 22 cubits,
17 cubits plus this many thousand cubits to get over the mountain. I gotcha. But I can see what you're saying. I can see you're saying how they took that statement and just slapped something at the end of it and completely changed it.
Exactly the way that Matthew does with some of the sentences of Mark. And there's a sentence, and he just adds a couple words to the end of it. So yeah, the flood happened.
Yeah.
It was, kind of like a New Orleans event. It wasn't the whole
Mhm.
world,
Yeah.
and no one at the time thought it was the whole world. They said it was this region.
Mhm.
Um, you know, but yeah, so there is some history in there, and that's one of the things I learned about the Bible. To answer Wes's question, is there's so much humanity in this book. The book is so much more impressive once you get rid of the gods, the idea that this book was handed down, by someone who can't make mistakes, and yet in the story is constantly making mistakes. The sheer humanity in this work, you can really get a good glimpse into the minds of the people, the culture,
Mhm.
the different the rival factions. They go through and they write the books of Samuel and Kings, and this is how all these things happen, and this is the grand, history of our nation. And then the Levites come along and they completely rewrite that section, and they call it Chronicles,
Yeah.
because you're not supposed to have Samuel and Kings anymore. You're just supposed to have Chronicles. And it's like, here's how it happened, but the Levites were the heroes of the story. Um, you know, and so you could just see how there, as different groups come to power, they they just rewrite the history, and they make it their own story, and they just feel completely free
Yeah.
to modify or invent things wholesale, to serve their own, social, political, and theological purposes. Um, and a lot
Yeah.
of it is just trying to maintain some semblance of identity in the face of crippling defeat, which is essentially what the Old Testament and the New Testament is about.
Yeah.
Much of the Old Testament was written after Babylon destroyed Jerusalem.
Yeah. Yep.
And then the New Testament,
The Gospels were Rome's
when Rome destroyed
occupation of
Jerusalem again. That's
yeah.
why they keep calling it the New Babylon.
Yeah.
Anytime you read Babylon in Revelation, they're talking about Rome.
Mhm.
They just don't want to get hung up on a stick, so they call it Babylon. You know what they mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, the humanity, that's in the book, the amazing, profound literature.
Yeah.
Um,
That's such a great insight you just laid down there, because it is kind of a travesty in that folks looking at this book and going, this is literal history given to us by God, is robbing us of the actual historical richness behind the book and the people that worked to make it, and the
yeah,
just all that's back there. And like a lot of this was like you've been a font of knowledge tonight, by the way, because a lot of this is new and fascinating to me, and I'm definitely gonna go check out your channel, uh because I like this is just amazing stuff to me, because the more I look at the Bible and the more that I see how human of a book it is, the more fascinating it becomes to me. But also it's like, yeah, and also the Christians are super wrong about it. So it's like
yeah,
it's kind of like a fun, like, kind of two-pronged
yeah,
incentive there. Because I don't have like a beef against Christianity is prominent religion here in the United States. I think it's utterly false, and I want to see it go away because I've seen it hurt so many people, myself included. So got a bit of a motivation to see Christianity go away. So as I study the Bible and as I learn these things, and I go, wow, like the Christians are really basing their religion off of just a man-made book.
yeah,
It's really fascinating to me. But also, like I said, it's by doing that, by robbing us of the historical record of the book and on what's gone into it, we're all losing something out of that, because this is a piece of
yeah,
literature, and as a piece of literature, it should be studied and it should be
yeah,
shared for everyone. Like, I don't want to see the Bible go away. I want to see it pulled open even more and analyzed even more, and,
yeah,
and
absolutely.
shown for what it
Uh,
actually is.
yeah, and I think to truly understand why there's so much grim horror in the Bible, look at any of the books that are going into detail about the siege of Jerusalem by the Babylonians, and you keep finding these references to people being forced to eat their own children.
Hmm.
It
Yeah, during the
happens in
siege.
Kings. It happens, I think, in Ezekiel. It keeps popping up, and you're just like, did this happen?
Yeah, what
Like,
happened here? Yeah.
is this one of the historical bits in there? They had to resort to cannibalism of their own. Like, this is horrible. And these are the people that wrote these stories, people who survived incidents like that.
Hmm.
This is where it was born, you know? That's why there's such horrible things in there, like the revenge fantasy of killing the Babylonian babies.
Hmm.
That's why they wanted to do that, because like these are people who like they had to eat their kids in
Hmm.
all likelihood. It's tragedy, um,
Yeah.
and they're trying to salvage something from it. These are brutalized and damaged people who wrote this book.
Yeah.
And once you understand that, it starts to
Makes
make sense.
makes sense. Yeah.
You're like, now I can understand this literature, why it is so horrible.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Really puts the humanity back into it. And then it's
yeah, yeah,
understandable. Like, I mean, because like, even the stuff like you can understand, you can at least relate to it. Like you maybe say, okay, well, calling for the destruction of another group of children because your children suffered is
yeah,
immoral, but you at least understand the emotion behind it. You understand the humanity behind taking such a stance, because if you've been damaged so much like that, you can lash out and say those types of things. And that's, when you look at the Old Testament and the eating of the babies, and like I said, the slavery and the genocide and all those things, the desire for the nation to be propped up above all others because it's been, trampled on so much by others.
yeah,
You understand why that was written. You understand, like you have a connection there. There's a human connection there. Um, and yeah, and it's really sad that most of that is, like I said, just wiped clean by simply saying, "Oh, this
yeah,
is historical text." Like all that goes away, and it's
yeah.
really a crime. Like it's a crime against the history. It's a crime against our current man deserving to understand what actually went behind
Yeah,
what
yeah.
went on behind these writings. Okay, well, hey Jason, this was a delightful discussion tonight. Like I said, I think I did not expect this conversation to go in this direction. I thoroughly enjoyed this. I'm definitely going to check out your channel. It's the
Thank
Dragons and
you.
Genesis podcast. So before we close out, do you want to like kind of plug your channel, reiterate again what you do on it, and maybe get a few viewers heading your way?
Yeah, so if you want to find me on YouTube, which is I port all my stuff over eventually, just search Dragons in Genesis on YouTube and you'll find me. There's probably a link down below. Uh, if you want to listen to me on your drive to work, get any podcast app. Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spreaker, whatever. And just search Dragons in Genesis. Look for the big orange logo that has a silhouette of Godzilla attacking Jerusalem. That's me. You can't miss it. I'm everywhere. And if you don't feel like doing that, just go to dragonsandgenesis.com and there's links there. So
Awesome. I literally just hit the subscribe button as you were saying that. So you got a new subscriber right
thank
here.
you.
So
So yeah,
cool.
it's a chapter by chapter commentary of the will be the entirety of the Bible. Nothing gets skipped.
Cool.
And the theology is left out of it. It's just, what are the stories? What do they mean? Where did they come from? And how do they fit within the larger context of not only the Bible, but also Near Eastern mythology?
Cool. Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for the conversation tonight. And I guess we'll just start kind of closing this out here. So yeah, thank you folks for listening in. Down below, you can see a list of all of our patrons. Um, I don't know if should I be reading them out here. It's not going by too fast. I'll go ahead and read them out. Why not? They pay money, they deserve it. So patrons, we have Paul Cammish, Karen Butcher, HellsBells. We have Logan Fisher, Amanda McLeod. Rion, I owe you an email, by the way. I think that's kind of like theme. Every time I see Ryan's name pop up, I'm like, I gotta email her. She's a fellow SJW, and we're supposed to be doing a collaboration here pretty soon. D Murphy, Dan D, Michael Wiseman, Sunny Shell, and Phil Calderone. So thank you so much for your patronage, and thank you for supporting this channel. Jason, thank you again for your time and chatting here with me today. You, like I said, this was very enlightening, and I look forward to listening to some of your podcasts. And hey, let's trade information after this. Let's maybe connect up and we can do some more collaborations. And yeah, so thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Be sure to like and subscribe, folks, in the audience, and we'll catch you later.
This is Skeptic Haven. Let's Talk.